today we come before you with an offering of praise and thanksgiving. You are the ancient of these. We welcome your presence, your glory into this service today. We ask that as we look into your word, the intelligence that transcends time, that light rises, light shines in our hearts. It becomes light onto our path. It guides us, our beliefs, it guides our actions. We pray that even as we look into your word today, everyone is blessed, strengthened, edified through the teaching of the word and the ministry of the Holy Spirit. We ask that this word comes in our hearts, it takes root and produces fruit to the glory and honor of your name. In Jesus' name we have prayed. All right, say hi to your neighbor as you take a seat. Let's celebrate the Beckoners as well. Good morning, church. Okay, thank you. So I'm usually up here much later. It's been a while. Well, good morning, church. Okay. As is, I don't want to use the word practice, but it's the only word coming to mind, right? But as is our culture here at the tribe, we do not take the opportunity to bring God's word as a, what's the word I would use now? Light matter. So for those of us who may be slightly confused, I'm sitting, we're having a conversation, right? But we'll get into it. But before we get there, I'd like to ask us to please celebrate and genuinely celebrate the leadership of the PowerPoint tribe. Firstly, and I would say chiefly in the person of Pastor Dami Oguntunde in absentia. Right, maybe we can celebrate his wife, because two have become one, right? So I started out by saying that it's been a while since Sunday morning, and that pressure is different. Unfortunately, I cannot say if you be with my full chest. But if it was Thursday, I can say that. And then let's also celebrate the pastors and leaders at the PowerPoint tribe across all spheres for the amazing work they do in teaching in season and out of season. That being said, I think let me quickly jump into it. A couple of disclaimers. I'm sitting down. We're having a conversation. I like to take questions, but maybe towards the end. But you can write your questions down, and I really like to take questions. It shows me that one of the ways I know that you're engaging with what I'm saying. It's not just garbage in, garbage out, right? I also like to use slides because sometimes I tend to spread. And for those of us who are maybe here for the first time, it's not a thing, PowerPoint tribe and slides. No. Once in a while, it's not a thing, right? So come back next week, you see the regular standing and all, right? But that being said, I think in the interest of time, it will be good for me to jump in, right? Okay. So our topic is still, or our subject of conversation today is still on the mystery of generosity. And it's been an interesting and very practical session for me, and I believe for you as well. It's sort of built on some of the, would I say, trajectories that God was leading me in towards the end of last year and then towards this year as well, and then just causing a number of things to align. I think one of the good things I really like about this series is that it's as practical as it gets. Right from the very first message we had on the ministry of generosity, there were practical things you could take out of it to do. That was when we had the 21 days of generosity, right? But so that there is context, since this is a, so to speak, continuing of a conversation, let's just look at the journey so far. So the boss team gave me something, and I'm hoping it works. Okay, so boss is like, you're in charge. Right, because it's not working. All right, so let's just, I'll have you guys change the slide. So let's move to the next slide. So to give us context into this continuing conversation, right? We'll be looking back as to how far we've gone. And it's been 7 episodes so far, and this is going to be the 8th. So we'll get into the recap. Next slide, please. Oh, yeah, so 8 episodes so far. We had a source code break, which was amazing. I think I especially liked the Q&A. But that's just me. I'm sure different people had different sessions they liked. But let's start from the very first one. And I would say that's the prelude, right? How that the subject of generosity or the mystery of generosity is something that started during crossover service, right? That was when it was first introduced. And I think in running through the recaps, and I can't say this enough, the recaps are not going to do justice to the message. So please, they're on Spotify. Are we still on SoundCloud? I know we're on Spotify, but we're still on SoundCloud. Okay, great, because I know most people have potted. But they're on Spotify. Please do give them a listen. But I think I would emphasize this first one a little bit because it sort of lays the groundwork for everything else that was discussed. It sets the context, right? And in this particular teaching, one of the things Pastor Dami took us through was in creation, image and likeness, how that God created man in his own image and his own likeness. And one of the things he mentioned was likeness is a manifestation of an understanding of an image, right? So image is essence, DNA. Likeness is in sequence, right? Likeness cannot be faked. Likeness can be faked. You can act like someone. That's why sometimes you play all those funny games where you act like someone and then you guess who the person is, right? Because it can be faked, right? But the DNA, the essence, cannot be. And one of the things we saw in the creation story really is that the mandate in making man like God, the mandate was really dominion, right? He put a lot of things, or he made man have dominion over the 3 different stratas, the birds of the air, the guys on the land, the guys under the sea. And then, Genesis 3 happened, there was the fall, but then Jesus came and restored man DNA-wise, image-wise to the position, right? But then the likeness is usually, or is the bit that happens over time when it comes by, and comes by hearing, by renewing the mind, you become more like him. And I think somewhere at the back of my head, actually, I'm of the opinion that the Adam that God made in the garden was not complete yet. He was made in the image, but one of the reasons why the fellowshipping was so that transference of likeness can happen, right? And anyway, just speaking to how that the original plan for man is to have dominion, right? Ye are gods, right? And we then find that, I think one of the things that Pastor Dami emphasized was how that God nature is not always, is something that or that likeness is not something that is lived out to its fullest or expressed in ours. And one of the things that this entire series was meant to do, was to get man, or to equip us with the information, knowledge, and practical ways to get back to that position, right? And I think we read from Psalm 82, the whole year God's, and that the fact that corruption exists today because man is not taking that position, or is not filling that position as God. And one of the ways that man does that is through generosity. We then went to talk about how the economy of God is organized around sowers and eaters, right? Or how rather, it's organized around sowers, because, right, the eater needs a sower to have sown before eating. And then we then looked at, the sower and eater tendencies. Eaters always looking for miracles, reacting when they don't get their needs met, depending on sowers, jealous of others when receiving from God. Sowers, on the other hand, are developing capacity, taking responsibility, and then we believing in surplus and abundance. And then we went on to, I think this was a segue, but it was a really powerful bit for me, talking about the vocal gifts of prayer, of confession, and of prophecy, right? And the various places they played in the scheme of things. Let's move to the next slide, please. So that set the framework for everything else. And then we'll just quickly run through the other episodes so that we can continue the conversation, right? So episode 1, we looked at the mystery of generosity in its finest, like the first installment. And one of the key things that we talked about here is commodities of value. And Pastor Dami highlighted 4 commodities of value of words, of time, of relationship, and money. And I think one of the things he emphasized is that money is actually the list of these. And the interesting thing actually is that social science agrees. Well, we'll get there. And then one of the other things I emphasize in this teaching is how that we are meant to be the flow. That thing we end our confessions with, like, who are you? Yeah, that's it, right? And how that the whole point of God making you rich, right, is for you to be a blessing to all the families on the earth, like so, to infinity and beyond, right? And I think one of the key things in this one that really hits me is that God puts generosity before prosperity. A lot of times we are waiting to prosper before we're generous, but in terms of the value chain, generosity comes first before prosperity. We then also talked about 4 axioms from 2 Kings 4. This was the story of the widow who husband died and left BC on his way out. Let's not do that. God will only work with what's in your house. The oil will remain small until you start pouring. The limit is not on the oil, but on the willingness to pour, and you cannot be anointed and disadvantaged at the same time. Next slide, please. We then went on to activating angelic ministry by generosity, and Pastor here mentioned or talked about how a lifestyle of generosity, a habit of generosity, produces Kairos moments, right? It's not something. It's supposed to be a habit. It's supposed to be a lifestyle. It's not something that you say, oh, this person is coming and then you're generous, and then somebody's not coming and then you're not generous. It's in the consistency, or in the living a constant life of generosity, that you enter Kairos moments. He also talked about how that for Sarah, the hospitality and generosity was a shield, right? Even though she had some lapse in terms of receiving God's word to her, but that generosity was a shield and a covering, right? And then that particular session was ended by a call to open your heart. And we'll find out why soon enough. Episode 3, please. Next slide. Then securing destinies by generosity. This one is very straightforward. How to find a wife, how to find a crown, is by being constantly generous. We looked at the story of Rebecca. We looked at the story of Saul. And it was pretty much straightforward, right? So attitude, habits, discernment. Those are some of the things I will emphasize in this session as well. How that the position of generosity or the posture of generosity is meant to be the default. You're meant to use discernment to tell you when to not be generous, as opposed to use discernment to tell you when to be generous, right? All right, next slide. We then had twin forces of power, and in this session, Pastor emphasized the pure religion, right, as defined by the Bible, helping the widows, helping the fatherless, and how that the kind of fast that God has called is not just the one where you deprive yourself, but in doing so, you also be a blessing and be generous to others. We looked at the early church and how that their growth was fostered by generosity, talking about how people came, and gave of their substance, and the apostles distributed as fit. We also looked at Ananias and Sapphira and how that there was an emphasized need for holiness and the fear of God, even in the generosity. Next slide, please. Yeah, then we had the source code break, which was amazing. Episode 5, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay. Before they catch up. The next one is Be That Neighbor. Here, Pastor Damid looked at the story of the Good Samaritan, and basically just looked at the different people that passed by. And I think one of the key things I took out of that particular session was when he talked about some of the reasons why people tend not to help, or reasons for inaction. A lack of understanding of the essence of faith, judgment and condemnation, assuming that the man must have done something to deserve the fate that befell him. We'll get there. And fear of personal risk, especially in a city like Lagos, depending on the time of day that you are moving around. If you see someone's car stopped on the road, you're going to go be careful, and allied matters, right? But then one of the things that was also emphasized here is in the need for intelligent generosity, right? There is a way one can be generous that makes, that would I say, in some way makes the person who they're being generous to dependent, right? But there's need for intelligent application of wisdom in generosity. Then we had episode 6, The Secret Place, talking about the power and the wisdom of God, how that the power of God is preserves, while wisdom is for penetrating. Right? And I think one of the things looked at here is the balancing forces of holiness and excellence as a manifestation of wisdom. The diagram that sort of is in my head is a little intertwined. I don't know how many of us have seen those I've forgotten what they call them now, but it's like an infinity loop. It's an engineering term. Right? It's almost, and what Pastor was talking about in this case was how that we are hidden Christ, who is hidden God. So there's that sense of, there's that protection. But then at the same time, Christ is in us, and so there's that wisdom. So that imagery just gives you a sense of how that the power of God is around you, at work in you, preserving you. But at the same time, Christ is in you and is made wisdom. And I think the culmination of Christ actually is made both the power and the wisdom of God onto us, right? And then last week, an interesting, okay, we're there. Last week, so next slide, please. Fathering a generation in need of generosity. Pastor touched on something that I think he had sort of hinted at a couple times when we had sessions around the impact of fatherlessness in society, and how that the essence of generosity really is to bridge that fatherlessness gap in society because of its far-reaching effects. And then some of the things highlighted here would be how that fatherhood provides vision, provision, and defense. Vision because without vision, people perish, right? Provision because you need something to sponsor, quote unquote, or to facilitate the achievement of said vision, and then defense to protect both vision and provision. Once again, can we celebrate Pastor Dami? It's been 7 episodes back to back. And today we're going to take that thought further, or these thoughts further, with an episode I've referred to as the arena. The arena. I knew I was going to make that mistake. Right? But the arena, that's what we're going to be talking about today. And yes, when you think arena, don't think your stadium. Think those coliseums that were back in the day. How many of us watched Gladiator? Or maybe that's the wrong question. How many of us were old enough to watch Gladiator? But yeah, it's an interesting story. I hear there's, a mix. There's a mix of fiction and non-fiction in there, but I think it's mostly seen as fiction, right? I'll be having this conversation in 3 quick sections. So let's have section 1. Next slide, please. Okay. Next slide is the first section is what I refer to as crazy math, right? Somewhat irrational generosity terms. For those of us who are in HDD today, Pastor Ewa mentioned something about some certain calculus in engineering and all. This is one of those types of math, right? But I think at this point I would actually really need that slide to be up because I can't tell you what, like, it's easier for me to show you, right? Next slide, please. Right. So what if I told you that this adds up? I know it may have been a while since we did anything math related, but I mean, this should be, 11 minus 5 gives you 20. 23 plus 2 gives you 19. What if I told you this adds up? Next slide, please. And I know you may say it's too early. There was no warm-up. There was no warning. We entered this conversation. And I'm already telling you things that are not adding up. No, your eyes are not paining you. That is 5 and that is 2. But let me give you context. Next slide, please. Proverbs 11:24. There is one who scatters yet increases more. And there is one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. There is one who scatters. He had 11. He scattered 5. But the end result is that he has 20. There's the one who withholds more than is right. He had 23. Just 2 he added. Very, nothing to, urgent 2K. Right? But what he ended up with is 19. The funny thing actually is that this particular proverb is repeated severally. You have something like this in Proverbs 13:7 as well. You have something like this as well in Ecclesiastes, even though I mean the same author. You have something similar in Luke, but we'll get there. Next slide, please. Now, if you're like me, the first thing you start asking yourself is like, who is this person speaking first? What does he know about math? What does he know about, value? What does he know about wealth? Is one of those aspire to refire, those people that tell you that
money does not bring happiness. But they themselves don't have it. Right? Like you're taking what they're saying with a pinch of salt. Like, you don't know what you're talking about, right? And then within context, right, what the Bible says is, he who withholds more than is meet, more than is right. So the question is, what is right? What are we meeting, right? And when I read when I was thinking about this, what came to my mind is, making ends meet. Like, are those the things that we're trying to meet? And the interesting thing about that saying, to make ends meet, is that one of the places that they say it came from is how that if someone is big, the person has been living lavish, and then he sees his bank account and he needs to reduce his spending. The whole idea is that his belt he has gotten too big for his belt. So in order for him to make ends meet, he has to reduce his spending, so that the ends of the belt can meet, right? But yeah, what is right? What is the end or what are the ends that need to meet? And one of the reasons why I ask this question is because I believe everybody here in this room, and if you are not on that table, it's fine, I'm on that table, would like to have financial security or some level of security. You're going out, you see something, you like it, you want it, you got it. I think the funny thing actually is that there's biblical reason, or you can find biblical proof to back that up, right? The Lord is my shepherd, right? So if I want it, right? So we now need to try to attempt to answer these questions, right? Next slide, please. Of course, you know who is speaking. King Solomon is speaking, and if you're looking at it from like modern terms, what his net worth was, back in the day, was about $2 trillion. Even your guy has not gotten there yet. I don't think it's up to half. No, it's not up to half of it yet, right? So this is not one of those, I don't have money, but I'm telling you that money doesn't give you happiness, guys, right? This guy had it. I remember the particular time where Pastor Dami was teaching, I was talking about the daily killings for his table, like the meat, the number of cows, number of lambs, and we're comparing it to, I think at the time we were trying to juxtapose with what happens at Redemption, is now Redemption City, right? And how that, even with that, right, Solomon's table was still, that's one man, one household, right? So, follow who know road. This guy knows what he's talking about. And when we're now talking about what is right, Scripture also provides some context, right? And I think let's read this one actually, because it's very interesting. Galatians 6 from verse 2 and 5. I think one of the things I liked about this particular series of verses is that he balanced it real quick. In the beginning, he says, bear one another's burden. And a few verses down the line, he's clearing you. Everybody carry your load. So it's like, let's not go too far, right? Before you balance things out real quick, right? Before you become, and funny enough, I think is the same author that I was talking about how, widows, if you have other people, if you are marriable, you can't marry, don't become a burden to the church. Like, just, really trying to balance things, right? So there's a balance between bearing your own burden and also being generous and helping another in terms of generosity. There is also, I would say, the place of seasons and instructions. You look at the children of Israel, at some point in their journey, it was, what was right was all you needed to eat for that day. Anything extra you packed, reduced. Like, the next day you open it, it had maggots and stuff. And then they got into Promised Land. The first Jericho being the first one, and the instruction was clear. This one said, don't take anything. What was right is don't keep anything. And we see how things played out in because someone kept something. It's just really interesting when you think about it, right? He kept something thinking it was increasing, and then at the end of the day, it was very funny. But then when it then gets to AI, the instruction is, gather everything you can gather. This one is your own, pack, divide the spoils, all of that. And so there's the balance of, your own burdens, which refers to, what you need to make ends meet. And for different people, it will be different things. But then even with that context, there's still the balance of, bearing one another's burdens. The interesting thing about the sequencing of Galatians 6 is that bearing one another's burdens comes first before bearing your own. So if you're even looking at it in terms of which came first, right? But again, this is a conversation. Okay, before I get there. So from this, right, it's safe to say that math, as funny as it looks, adds up, right? Right? Okay, I hear you guys. Next slide, please. Jojo. It's English. Let's talk reality things, If I give you something, it's almost like everyone's that, those primary school, John has 5 apples. He gives out 2. How many apples does John have? And then, you can't tell me that John has 10 apples at the end of that sequence. It doesn't add up biblically. And then, Solomon knows what he's talking about, right? But that was how many thousands of years ago? Economics have changed. We're no longer in the monarchy. We do democracy here. There's capitalism at work. All those yada yada. The road that he's talking about, they blocked it, right? So all of this is English. I hear you. Next slide, please. But the interesting thing is, I can actually explain with evidence, right? With evidence, and that's what we're going to be looking at shortly. Next slide, please. Now, I've turned this Hebrew to Greek, and this is taken from the idea that the gospel presented to the Greek was foolishness. Right, and I think there have been a number of teachings where Pastor Delius Makinde, founder of TBC Global, has taught on how that a lot of times we need to translate spiritual capital into socio-economic coefficients. To be able to speak the language that some of the people in the world understand. Right, I think one of the examples he used was how that Joseph standing before Pharaoh didn't begin to scabash. Same thing with Nehemiah. Even though Nehemiah prayed, but his response to the king was in terms that the king could relate with. So what we're going to be doing is, just translating some of this Hebrew that is English into modern Greek so that we can see the practicality of the things that we are being taught and actually believe the somewhat irrational generosity theorems, right? So one of the disclaimers I need to put out here before we jump in is one of the things we talked about in the recap is that there are 4 measures of value, as it were, time, relationship, money being the list of them, right? Now it will be words, time, relationship, money being the list. Now I can't track words on a macroeconomic scale. I'm not listening to what you're saying. I'm not listening to what I'm saying. I can't exactly track how you spend your time either. You can't track how I spend my time. And do that as well on a macroeconomic scale. I can't do that. Relationships as well, I can't do that. Even though there's that saying that you are 6 persons from anybody else in the world. I've actually not looked into the science behind that. But I can't track that. I don't know how many people you have in your network and how you relate to them and how you nurture those relationships. While money is the least in the value chain, it's one of the things that is more easily tracked because it's ones and zeros. It's something that we can measure at country level, state level, and as we're speaking, you can measure your own. You can run that math real quick in your head, right? And so we'll be using money as the frame of reference for these translations. But again, it's important to know that money is the least. A lot of these things that we'll be exploring apply to the other values as well, right? And quite in a very straightforward manner. All right, next slide, please. Oh, some people may not get the engine joke, but if you get it, that's fine. First slide is, we're going to first be looking at the economic perspective. And I'm still going to give, I know while we're translating Hebrew to Greek, I'm still going to give you Hebrew to contextualize. Two scriptures here. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Ecclesiastes 11:1. And then Luke 6:38. Give and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. Right? All right, with that in mind, let's now explore the economic machine. Next slide, please. Here is something interesting that you may not have thought about. Your spending is someone else's income. Every amount of money you spend is an amount of money that somebody else earns. Unless you eat the money. But I don't believe such people here exist because it's only wild animals that do that. You know, monkeys, snakes, and so those are the only guys I know that eat money. But unless you fall under that category, every amount of money you spend is someone's income. And every amount of money that someone else spends is your income, because you don't pluck it from trees. Someone pays you salary, but that's an expense to the company. If you run a business, someone buys a product from you, that's an expense to them. Right, so that's how the economy works. Spending, and then I would add giving, because money moving from hand A to hand B is how the economy works. Are we aligned? Yeah. Great. No monkeys and snakes in the room. Next slide, please. Quick scenario. Let's say you increase your spending or your giving. What does that imply? Someone else's income goes up. Their income goes up means they can apply that money to increase their productivity. They can buy machines. They can employ more people. They can, put out more products. They can do more marketing spend. And in doing all of that, what are they doing? They're increasing their spending. That increase in spending somehow trickles down to productivity and in turn increases your earning. And then, the cycle continues. So the mere fact of you increasing your spending or your giving causes the economy to grow. Of course, it's not as straightforward as this. There are a number of other factors here and there. There's credit, there's trust, there's taxes and all whatnot, right? But on a broad sense, your increase in spending increases someone else's income, increases productivity, increases your income, and that cycle continues. Of course, I don't need to tell you what happens if the reverse occurs. Please, next slide. You reduce your spending, means someone else's income goes down, means that person needs to, tighten his belt, so his own expenses goes down, and, there's that ripple effect, and your own income goes down. Here's the interesting thing, is that this cycle tends to play out over periods. Let me use a case in point that I believe we should all be able to relate to at some level. COVID happened. What did governments do in response? Palliative, they basically increased their spending. What that meant was that some people's income went up. One of the ripple effects of that today is, see all this, well, even though there's an inflation side of things, and I don't want to get into it because it's complicated, right? But one of the nominal or face value, one of the nominal effects of this is the salary adjustments that we've been seeing going on across companies. The reason for this is money supply went up, and I don't want to get into inflation. It gets interesting. But spending was increased, and as a result of that, earnings have increased nominally. Right, let me put that disclaimer out there, nominally. The reason why it's nominal and not real is because a lot of those things didn't have a corresponding increase in value. Right, but on a normal day, take, for example, as a business person, you take a loan from the bank. Of course, you're taking the loan, the idea here would be to take the loan to increase something about your business so that you can make more income. So that increase in your spending as a result of credit increases your productivity and the economy expands, right? But what happened with palliatives is that there was an increase in spending without a commensurate increase in productivity. It was basically, there was a term that went around that year when the US was giving palliatives and some people in some states in Nigeria were collecting as though they were residents. Benefit boys, right? Okay, you guys don't know. I'm sorry. Right? You can scratch that. You can erase that if you didn't know. But basically, it was a system of some Yahoo guys do identity theft and collect some of that money and all of that. Anyway, but let's come back. On a broad base, your increase in spending causes the economy to grow. A decrease in spending causes the economy to contract. Is capitalism at work? Right. Next slide, please. Your savings will hardly make you rich. I know. What you do with your savings is what might make you rich. I'll give you very simple. I'll put this in. Okay, before I give you examples, let me position this biblically before you guys want to bundle me and throw me somewhere. All right, saving is wise. Saving is biblical. We're advised to save. My rule of thumb comes from Joseph, actually. Save 20, at the minimum, save 20%. Right. However, overdoing it is foolishness. And I'll explain. If we use the cycle, right, and you overdo your savings to the point where you are removing money from the economy will contract. You get my point? Money that is in circulation, every time it enters your hand, rather than being a flow, you pack all you can. You cannot get all you can all you get, sit on the can, right? That's it, right? You reduce right, and economy contracts. It's one of the reasons why, okay, let me reduce what I was going to say, but it's one of the reasons why those who would typically take money from the system and keep it in cash in their houses, especially when it's illicit money, is very detrimental to the economy. Because it just sits there. Can't do nothing, can't help anybody until snakes or monkeys find it. Right? But let me come back to explain what I mean by your savings will hardly make you rich. What's the average cost of a house in Lagos today? Let's assume that you want to stay in Lagos, right? Okay, no, build. No, someone can give me any number. Give me any number. Any number is fine. Buy now. Buy. Where do you want to? Mainland. Let's be humble. Yaba, Ikeja, Surulere, 250. Let's work with 250. Question. No, it's obviously million. I can't be 250,000. Question. What's your salary today? Run the math in your head. How many months are you going to? How many years are you going to save to buy a house in Lagos? I mean, I don't need to do that math for you. You can already do it, right? But I think one of the symptoms of this realization is the gambling culture you find in Nigeria, not just in Nigeria, in economies like Nigeria today. I think I heard something similar in Ghana, that because they just concluded elections not too far back, one of the deciding factors, right, for who people voted for was the party that said, you see this gambling tax, because what they do, they instituted a gambling tax to try to curb gambling. So like whatever you win, I think is it 10% or so of it belongs to the government. Just so you know, so that people can stop gambling, but it's increased. One of the deciding factors, allegedly, in who they voted for was the party that said they were going to remove that tax. In Nigeria today, stats say that we spend at about 65 million. People spend about 1 trillion naira on a monthly basis. Trillion. For context, the body... No, you get it. Let me not give you context. On a monthly basis. I think, at some point I was like, yeah, like it's a bad thing. They shouldn't be doing that. And I still maintain that stance. But at a certain level, I can understand. It's an avenue to make it. Because think about it now. No, think about it. Most of the people in this room, white collar jobs, correct? You're in a decent salary. If we're going to do your category of, you're probably in the top 5% of, some people here, top 1% of the earners in Nigeria. But when you run the math to buy a house, it will take you a while. Imagine the guy who is doing Yanoro Road. Well, for those of us who don't know, Yanoro Road is the conductors, Yanoro. They typically are on the island. For those of us who do that commute, that's what they call, right? And so I can empathize because it's almost like that's the way out. Like it's a way out. And the audacity of hope. It's your last card though, but it will be you. One day, it goes round. One day to be my turn. And the thing is that there are all these stories about, other people who have, hit it big, and those stories go wild, they go viral, they make you. So I get it, right? Hope against hope, right? So I get it. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm saying your savings will hardly make you rich. What you do with it. The whole idea of saving is so that you can invest, somehow put it back into the economy to work for you, not keep it outside. Right, and putting it back into the economy could mean investing in assets, could mean generosity and giving as well. And we'll get to that in a bit. And so that's the whole idea of behind investing. So investing and shared prosperity. When you invest or when you give, you become a partaker of the shared prosperity of the economy expanding. Right. I think there was a debate that we had a while back. I'm trying to remember. I think it was with Falcon. When I was talking about how gambling versus stock trading, one went to school, one didn't. One is packaged, one is not. That was his argument, right? That they are technically the same thing. Yeah, buying a stock, you don't know if it go up, you don't know if it go down, you're hoping to go up. Well, I disagree. Because with gambling, a lot of times they net sum game. Right? So everybody gambles, we take a sum of the pot, whoever wins, we split it. With investing, on the other hand, the money is committed to productive use, in the sense that whichever company, for example, IPOs, the money is taken, they can apply that to grow their business, expand their business into new frontiers and things like that. And then you as an investor partake in that shared prosperity. Here's the funny thing. Over the last, if you look at the equities market, and I know, biased because I'm in that space. If you look at the equities market, both in Nigeria, home and abroad, so in the US and Nigeria, over time you find that it trends upwards, right? It always trends upwards. Yes, there may be some dips in certain years, but if you buy the dip and, and hold the door, right? Over time, the returns, and funny enough, the interesting thing actually is that when you run the analysis, the returns of the overall market, equities markets, often beats when you select a few stocks. The returns of the overall markets often beat fixed income securities that are more steady. But let me not dwell on that too much. Then you also have the concept of Ajo and capital formation. And I think one of the benefits of Ajo is the ability to... We all know what Ajo is, right? Okay, all of you gather money and give one person, and then next month another person's turn. Is that it helps you accumulate capital in such a way that you can apply it to some productive use. That's the idea. That's the idea. Not always what plays out, but that's the idea. And so I would say, because your savings cannot make you rich, and you understand who you are, because it's important and fundamental that we have that understanding of who we are in Christ, and how that we are hid in Christ in God, how that we are the apple of his eye, how that the birds, the sparrows, they do not labor, they do not toil, they do not save. Yet they do not have to worry about their needs, and how much more would God take care of you? is to take the approach of a trust fund kid when it comes to investing and giving. You know trust fund kids? They have, some safety net, right, that they can fall back on. And God is that safety net that you can always fall back on. So you can, with that mindset, apply yourself to investing and giving. Like putting the money to work, right? Either in ways that benefit you directly or in ways that benefit you as a shared, prosperity of the economy. One other thing I was going to talk about actually, and perhaps I'll just touch on it and then we'll quickly move on. How that in saying your savings will hardly make you rich. Of course, we're all aware that if you had saved 500, let me use 1,000. If you had saved 500,000 a couple years back and you still had 500,000 today, that 500,000 is no longer 500,000, even though nominally it is 500,000. Like what 500,000 can buy is not what, right? So again, there is he who withholds more than his meat. But what happens is 20 plus 2 gives you, no, it's 23. It has to be 23. 23 plus 2 gives you 19. That's it. All right, let's move on. Hebrew to Greek, the social perspective. The Bible verse here is, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. Now, the interesting thing actually is that if I was going to ask in the room, do you think that human beings are intrinsically selfish or intrinsically altruistic? Intrinsically selfish meaning they're looking out for themselves. Intrinsically altruistic means they're looking out for other people. They're trying to be benevolent. Altruistic. No hand. No believer in humanity. Wow. Okay. I'm shocked too. But here's the funny thing actually. There was an experiment that was conducted by... Okay, I think I see where this is coming from. Adam Smith and his economic policies have gotten to all of us. Because Adam Smith is one who pushes all these theories about, intrinsically selfish and how that capitalism, at least the way it's set up today, sort of weaponizes, maybe not the right word, but leverages humans' selfish interests for the collective good. Right, depending on how it's set up. I'm not going to get into that. But there was an interesting experiment conducted by TED, TED Talk, those guys. They called it the mystery experiment. What they did was that they got 100 people across 6 different countries, 3 low-income countries, 3 high-income countries. I think it was Brazil, Indonesia, I think Kenya. And then there was the UK, the US, I think Australia, and one other country. And they basically gave everybody, or all these 100 people, $10K each. And the instruction was simple. It's your money. Spend it how you want. The only thing is that you just tell us what you spent it on. That's all. But please, there's no strings attached. Spend it how you want, but just, let us know how you spent it. For half of this sample size, they said that they need to post on social media how they spend it. Twitter was the platform that was used. For the other half, you don't need to post it. One of the things they wanted to check was to see if human beings actually align with Adam Smith's theories or there's some generosity in there. And then to account for, various levels of income, they pick from high income and low income, to account for the impact of social effects, right? In terms of, some people may want to give so that there's some social status there, or, and all of that. So they reap some social currency. They said half of them should post, half of them should not. Guess what they found? About 22% of said spending was was pro-social. That's how they called it. So, obviously, I didn't want to bore us with all the stats and all of that, but if you are really curious about it, just Google it, the mystery experiment by TED. When I say pro-social, I mean that they were generous about it. There were things that they didn't spend on themselves, but they spent on others. And now, by the time they drilled down, on average, of the 10K, about 30-something was pro-social, but by the time you net off what they did to friends and family, you then have about
By the time you net that off, you have about 22%. By the time you then net off the ones that which was, would I say, purely charity in that sense, it then came to about 16 point something percent, give or take. But two things and the other thing that they found out was that there was hardly any variance between, like the variance between those who posted and those who didn't post wasn't significant, right? So, contrary to popular belief, right, human beings do tend to have an altruistic side to it and to themselves, and I think it speaks to how we are wired. Next slide, please. Let's imagine that you're self-seeking, like we have all imagined, right? How should you spend your resources to maximize your happiness? That's the assumption, right? Spend it on yourself. You want something, you take yourself out, have a nice day, that's what you would think. Next slide. 2 different studies have been run. The dictator game. In this one, they basically got a couple of people, gave them small money, $5 here, $20 there, and asked them to, you can decide, give it out or spend it on yourself. And then towards the end of the day, they then come back to check in with those guys, how they perceived their day and whether they were happier or not. What they found significantly was that those who gave out the money, who spent it on someone else, were a lot happier than those who didn't. There was no significant difference between those who were giving $5 and those who were giving $20. So it wasn't really about the amount of money in that sense. It was the fact that they were able to give. The way I'm looking at it is a percentage thing. I got $5, I gave $5, I'm happy. In 2013, there was another study run across 136 countries, and they found out that there's a positive correlation between the giving culture and happiness. I think that's another reason why, maybe Nigeria is, when you talk about happiness in Nigeria, we're ranked high there, even with all that is going on in Nigeria, is because we do usually be giving. Yeah, and I mean, I can, if I were to, take this, stretch it to an extreme, I can tie it into, we have many churches, we have many NGOs, we have many of those things, so every now and then we're giving, and so there's that. The study also accounted for variances in income and other variables. One of the things that this study actually found is that time is harder to give than money. Which again just lends credence to the fact that money is, bottom of that ladder. Right? But social sciences prove that you feel happier, you feel better when you give. Next slide, please. I believe one of the reasons for this is the helper's high, right? What is referred to as the helper's high. There are certain chemicals that are released in your brain when you are a blessing to someone else, right? It's oxytocin, endorphins. And the fact that we're highly social creatures in terms of how we're wired also plays a factor in this, right? So, contrary to popular belief, we do have that altruistic, traits there somewhere. And we're sort of wired to do that to be happy. I think one of the other things that the study actually brought out was how that giving may actually ease depression, because it's hard to ease depression when the focus is on yourself, right? When you shift that focus to someone else, it's easier to ease. All right, let's bring things together. Next slide, please. So we looked at the social side, we looked at the economic side, we looked at the social side, and from socioeconomic perspectives, we've proven that this thing actually works, right? Right? Next slide. So I hope with these few points I've been able to convince you and not confuse you that, this thing, it adds up. Right? You right? Next slide. I know, it's tough. It's tough. I know. But here's the danger of fighting that fight in your head. Right? Next slide, please. Is that you're technically doing yourself. Because one of the things that it shows, right, is how that there's a tendency to excessively lean on the arm of flesh, on the princes, on the riches, on the fact that I have all this time, I can apply it to myself. I have all this network, I would apply it for myself, right? I have all these resources, I would apply it for myself. Yeah, erring on the side of trusting in the arm of flesh. The Bible in Jeremiah 17:5 says, "Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart departs from the Lord." One of the other things you find with this overkaku or oversense is that it can become a stumbling block. You look at the rich man who the Bible recorded in Mark that Jesus loved, and how that he had fulfilled everything about the law, but this one thing about generosity. And it had gotten to the point where it had become a stumbling block, and that Jesus then had to use that analogy. It would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. We've clarified the eye of the needle. It's not the sewing needle, just in case you are not aware. But it has a tendency to become a stumbling block to the point where you can't see beyond. Here's the funny thing with margins. There's a story of the king, 2 Chronicles 4:8-11. I think let's read this one. We haven't read all the while. Second Chronicles 14, we read from verses 8-11. And Asa had an army of 300,000 from Judah who carried shields and spears, and from Benjamin 280,000 men who carried shields and drew bows. All these were mighty men. Then Zerah the Ethiopian came out against them with an army of 1,300,000 chariots, and he came to Mareshah. So count the number of people that Asa had. Right? 585. Verse 10. So Asa went out against him, and he set the troops in battle in the valley of Zarephath at Mareshah. And Asa cried out to the Lord his God and said, Lord, it is nothing for you to help, whether with many or with those who have no power. Help us, O Lord our God, for we rest on you. And in your name we go against this multitude, O Lord our God. And so you are God, do not let this man prevail against you. So the Lord struck the Ethiopians before Asa and Judah, and the Ethiopians fled. Think about it, to 101 point something million people, right? And if you understand how, because I was reading up on it actually, because, and this was a while back, because I was thinking about how did people fight back then in those wars. Like, I'm not even sure what got me down this train of thought. I think I was thinking about the war in Ukraine and wondering how, soldiers identified themselves. And I was not thinking that back in the day, they used to wear uniform. Like, how do you know that this guy is on my side? Because like, we're 1 million. I can't possibly know everybody in that 1 million. So if you and there was an explanation as to how some of those wars were fought. It's not typically how you see it in Hollywood. Because in Hollywood, like, everywhere just scatter. You don't know who is who. It's just anybody, you don't remove the person's head. Right, but in terms of, like, they had lines. Like, they used to form lines and would go, like, but they're together, like lines. So I don't know if I think the military that perhaps has a practice that comes close would either be the Spartans or the Romans, how that, they form that shield wall, and that's how they move, right? So imagine that you have 585 men doing that, and then the number of people you are fighting against can round you multiple times. Yet you prevailed. Let's move to the second part. 2 Chronicles 16 was 1-9, but I think I'll probably just touch the highlights. Okay, so in the 36th year of the reign of Asa, Baasha the king of Israel came up against Judah and built Ramah that he might let none go out or come in to Asa king of Judah. So it was a siege. Then Asa brought forth silver and gold from the treasures of the house of the Lord and of the king's house, and sent to Ben-Hadad king of Syria, who dwelt in Damascus, saying, let there be a treaty between you and me, as there was between my father and your father. See, I have sent you silver and gold. Come, break your treaty with Baasha king of Israel, so he will draw from me. He tried to fill the gap. Right? But in verse 7, I'm going to skip because of time. In verse 7, Hanani, the seer, came to Asa, king of Judah, and said to him, because you have relied on the king of Syria and have not relied on the Lord your God, therefore the army of the king of Syria have escaped from your hand. Were the Ethiopians and the Lubi not a huge army with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because you relied on the Lord, he delivered them into your hand. For the eyes of the Lord run through and through the earth to show himself strong on behalf of those whose heart is loyal to him. In this you have done foolishly. Therefore, from now on, you shall have... Thank you. Back to the slide, please. You're technically doing yourself. If you choose to rely on the arm of flesh, what's that saying again? Live by the sword, die by the sword. Right.
it would, it's not a cost. It's not like I'm the one saying it, but chances are it would hardly cease to be something you have rest and exponential growth about. I guess the saying that comes to mind is penny wise. Great. Next slide, please. The thing with the gaps, or is that you kind of need to take it, there's a leap of faith or a step of faith that is required. There's a margin, right? The enemies, quote unquote, that you need to deal with. And guess what your fist is? That your fist is, next slide, please, in the presence of your enemies. Lands flowing with milk and honey do tend to come with giants, right? So we are going to the problem arena. Please, next slide. Right? Getting breakfast. 4 things about the arena. The arena really is where you take that leap and align with the somewhat irrational theorems around generosity, right? Where you calculate not as your bank account or as your calendar is telling you in terms of time now, but based on the mysteries of generosity. Next slide, please. So 4 things about the arena. Risk and reward. Let's not lie, let's not steal. People do be dying in the arena. Right? I know a lot of times we say that thing that people who said, nobody who said, if I perish, I perish, perished. Right? 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 Wrong. Some people perished. And I think one of the clear examples really is Paul. There was a clear, this guy, where you're going to be careful, the express you are going to, this is where, like, the prophet Agabus was dramatic. Like, so that you will not miss it, you know. And he still went. And he perished. The thing with the arena is that you would need to have courage. Because there'll be a margin. You'll be putting, and I mean, again, let's not lie, let's not steal. You'll be putting your resources, your time, your network, your money at risk. But there's no risk, or rather, there's no risk, no reward there. That's the saying, right? And fear usually is the thing that could hold you back. Fear is the mind killer. One of the things to put out there for those of us who may have attempted, or who may have gotten into the arena and got hit, bus, and we jumped out, right, is that you reap what you sow, not necessarily where you sow it. Some of us may have been generous towards some people and it didn't turn out quite the way you expected, right? Again, what the Bible says is that you reap what you sow, not necessarily where you sow it. It's what you sow. And then I guess just as an encouragement, right? See you in Christ, in God. To understand that even as you're going into the arena, you are shielded, you're guarded. Again, remember the analogy of the trust fund kid. Here's the thing about risk and courage is that you wouldn't have all the pieces. And as much as I'm saying this to you, I'm also saying this to myself. And you'll find out why when I get to the second point. Because, I mean, those of you who know me, we know once we get there. Right? But if you're waiting for all the pieces to fall into place, you'll be too late. You will always get in too late. So there's some courage that is needed in venturing into the unknown, in applying, in giving, in letting go, in being generous. Next slide, please. In the arena, it's not about what you know, it's about what you do. And I think very clearly, looking at the story of Elijah, Elisha, the sons of the prophets knew what was going to happen, but they knew. But they were sitting down somewhere doing analysis paralysis. Today is the day that your master will be taken. But only one person really did something about it. There's a true story, actually, about a renowned economist in Nigeria and a renowned banker in Nigeria. I'm not going to name names or give you any other idea. But story goes that this banker didn't really know much about the banking work he was doing at the time. And so after the office every day, he would go to meet this economist because they were friends and ask him, how do you see the market? And the economist would advise him, give him advice. The next day, the banker would go to the office. If he agrees, if he understood and he agreed, he would do what the economist advised. All along, the economist was not taking his advice. Today they are both no. Like they are popular people. But one is wealthier than the other today. Because one took action. Even though the advice he got was not self-generated, it was from somebody else. Right? Analysis paralysis is for the pews. It's not for the arena. I mean, if you are on the pitch, let's even take football, for example. You can't be running up and down between analysis paralysis. That's the last thing on your mind. Your one is, where's the ball? Who can I pass it to? Where's the post? That seems like is what can I do? Am I passing? Am I tackling? Do. Analysis paralysis is really not your business. It's the coach, the people on the pews that are not in the arena, that's their business, right? Revelation 12 tells us that they overcame the devil by the blood of the Lamb, by the word of their testimony. Testimony here translates to martyria, which is like a witness, to give a witness of what was done, right? So it's do. Next slide, please. The arena is allergic to virtue signaling. Case in point, sons of Sceva. It will work for some time until, because I mean, in an arena, like you're basically, you meet one, it works, you move to the next stage, it works. A certain stage that it won't work, right? And the Bible talks about how that dishonest skills are abominations to the Lord. So you may get away with it for a while, but at some point, water will find its balance. Now, that's not to say that you can't learn at the arena. You can learn, you can grow skills at the arena. That's actually one of the ways you build your fight IQ, right? But posturing is ill-advised. Full generosity, that's like fake generosity, is like if you're giving somebody something with an expectation of something else in return, that's not generosity, that's a deal. Transaction. I bought something, like I give you money, you give me food. It's a transaction. I'm not being generous in that sense. It's a transaction. Next slide is that it's usually for king and country. People don't jump in there for just themselves. It's usually bigger than just them. For those of us who, I mean, a couple of examples. You look at David jumping into the arena to fight Goliath. It wasn't just him. You look at Joseph as well. In hindsight, you realize it wasn't just him. I mean, even the Maximus, what's that his full name again? Maximus, the something. Shout the guy. That guy from Gladiator, right? It wasn't just about him, right? So it's about a heart stretched beyond you. In wrapping it up, next slide, please. I just have one thing to say. Next slide, please. Be strong and courageous. Yeah, God. Don't die like mere men. That's not the life you were called to. That's not what you were built for. Right? And I understand that, and I mean, I understand this on a personal level. The need to be able to see the end from the beginning. The need to be able to plot that graph, as we would call it. All right, but take those steps. Yes, you may fail, but that's one of the reasons why there's the safety nets. That's one of the reasons why there is the quote-unquote trust fund. Right, God's got you. Right? All right, we've come to the end. Time to take questions if anybody has. Next slide, please. Anybody with questions? Going once. Going twice. I think while we're doing this, we can also prepare to give. I think we can move away from the slides to give our tithes and offerings, as is our practice. While you're ruminating and thinking about whether you have questions, it would be good to have questions. But if you don't, that's fine as well. Let's give our tithes and offerings from that perspective. Again, understanding the generosity theorems as has been proven. All right. That to withhold more than is meet is detrimental to you spiritually, detrimental to your soul,
detrimental even to material things. So the account number is on the screen for those of us who are transferring, but if you have cash, I believe there's a basket going around as well. And Father, we thank you because out of the much you've blessed us with, you've blessed us on all sides, in time, in words, in the ability to call things, to speak things and bring them to life, in the network, in setting the solitary families, in the resources, material that you've granted unto us. Thank you because out of the abundance that you've lavished us with, we have the opportunity to come back to you with a token of our appreciation. We ask that this causes, that as your word says, it's as we give, it's measured, pressed down, shaken together, and it runs over. And it produces in us fruits of righteousness. It produces in us fruits of bountiful harvest. At all times, in every season, we have more than enough for every good work that you have called us into. For in Jesus' name we've prayed. Amen. All right. No questions? No questions? One question. Okay. One question. Oh, is that another hand I see there? Okay, no, it's not. Just one question. Was there another hand? Okay, there's another hand. Okay.
Thank you, sir. Just a comment on, the giving part, right? Not withholding, allowing the flow and all of that. So I have a concern regarding drawing the line between that and being, you said trust fund, right? But 80% of the time I feel uncomfortable when people have to come and rescue me because I acted like a trust fund baby. I don't want to be a burden to, because then again, it's God, right? Yes. But God uses people. And there's this discomfort that comes from, when you feel like your trust fund baby activities and your decisions are costing others something in that sense. So where do we balance the carefreeness and I don't know if you get what I'm trying to say.
So I get a question. I'm thinking about how to answer it. But straightforward answer really will be in the balance you find in Galatians 6. Be a responsible person. Bear your own burdens. However, also be able to tell the difference between what are burdens and what are, for lack of better terms at the moment, weights that easily beset. Like unnecessary weights that would not, there's, how Jesus said, take my own yoke, for my burden is light. There's one that you may be carrying that it did not give you. Right? And that may be causing, that may create a, what's the word now, an unreal or untrue position of what is right and what is meat. Right? But primarily be a responsible person, bear your own burden. And I would say especially for you. I mean, the Bible talks about a man who cannot provide for his family. So I get that. I get where you're coming from. Right? So primarily be responsible. Right? But of course, every now and then there will be leaps of faith. Right? Every now and then there will be, and God usually comes through. He's not one to be owed. Right? But yeah. This perspective. There was another question. Okay.
Good morning, sir.
Hi, good morning.
So there's this, it's kind of like a scenario where person A is always in need of something, and the person B gets to give. Like it comes to person A, I need this, and person B is seeing this as a constant occurrence, and it's like, okay, I met it. Oh, okay. I'm person B. I'm person B. So he met me one Sunday, and I was disturbed, right? And he was asking for something. I was like, okay, I'm going to give it to you. And I asked him, did you go to church today? And he said, yes. What did you learn? But the summary of it all was that I said, I'm going to be here every Sunday to eat, right? Every Sunday, you will meet me here. Do you get? I will give you food to eat. But you must tell me what you learned in church. So is that being generous or it's a deal? Like, do you get? So, and if you don't give me something you learned in church,
No food for you.
don't get me. So,
Okay, that's a good question, and an interesting setup. I'm thinking about again how to answer it, but there are two ways one can look at this. On the one hand, I would say you're being generous because you are not just spending your money, you're spending your time, right? Money is the one that we can track. You're giving the person food. Time, on the other hand, on some days maybe 30 minutes, on some days maybe 1 hour. At the same time, so from that perspective, I'll say you're being generous. At the same time, there's another perspective where it could be detrimental to both parties, especially if what this person is doing is going through the motions just to eat. I'm not going to use any personal examples. I'll just answer your question. But I think really the key thing with intelligent generosity, and I think it was the 4th installment. He hasn't taught it. Now, I know there was one he talked about balancing, like intelligent generosity, like balancing wisdom. Okay, he just spoke to it, he didn't teach. Okay, so look forward to that. Look forward to that episode. I think that's the first thing I'll say. The only way that I would say that relationship doesn't become detrimental to both parties is when it actually is impacting on the person's character and ability to become a sower himself. Or, so to speak, a fisherman and not just getting fish. Not that every day I bring to you a worm and you give me fish. And that's a transaction if it's at that level. But if it's at the level where he is being transformed and becomes, what's that Bible verse again about? Let he who steals not steal. We should go and walk so that he can give. So if those interactions beyond, because if it was just that you're giving him food and that's it, that's an unbalanced relationship in that sense. But the time being spent in fellowship should be transformative in nature. The movie that comes to mind is the one we watched, The Forge, right? Have you seen it? You've not seen The Forge? Okay, I'll advise that you see it. But it was a similar setup. A young man was looking for a job. He ran into this older man and their first interaction was very funny. But then the man took him on and said, you know what, I'll give you a job under the condition that every day or every week? Was one of the two channels, certain frequency, they would meet. And what they would do in that meeting was that the man would actually mentor him, teach him, and make him into being a better person. And that relationship, at the end of the movie, we saw how it transformed both his spiritual life and also his socioeconomic standing. Right, so as long as that relationship doesn't create a dependency, then, yeah. No other questions, I believe?
Hi.
Great. Question as birth question.
Hello, sir.
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Yeah, so my question is about black tax, yeah? Family dynamics, friends, relatives, and the likes. So for me now, yeah, how do I explain this? You know how, this is not good, but like, you know how some people look forward to your money? Like, look forward to it, and even you know. So like sometimes you may even forget the date your salary will come in, and they're already calling you prior, that how far is already 28, right? And you are just trying to. So some people, how do I put it now? It's worrisome, like you said. You know how you talked about withholding and not wanting to. You know that the situation they're in is very, really, you know. So it's not like you cannot empathize with them, you know. But when it now looks like this is not to lie, 6 months, 9 months, a year, you are doing that same thing back to back to back. It pretty much becomes like an allowance or a salary. And you talk to that person and you're like, okay, I want things to be better for you. Please do this, please do this, please do this, so that things will be better for you. But the person doesn't listen, right? And it now looks like, when you now stopped, let's say you stopped,
You're
you
the
now
wicked
look like,
person.
you now look like
Eh,
a bad
you're,
person.
you're the bad person.
You know, then the news like kinds of goes around and you know, so and you've spoken to like other people, maybe your mom, and your mom was like, so like whatever you have, give, right? But I think my question is about discretion, discernment, and how do you still manage such relationships that you and that person are still good? You don't necessarily, like your family now, you don't want to be, you still want them to be good with you. You still want to invite them to your birthday and they come happily, you know? So that's yeah. And I think a lot of young people are like struggling with it, you know? You are 25 to 35, you just got married, your wife is telling you, don't give this auntie money again. You are doing too much. You have us to think about. So how do you like manage and maneuver all of that?
Okay. So to be honest, the answer is not too far-fetched from my last answer to him. But I'll add something to it. Black tax is interesting, and even the origin of that term is interesting, but let's not get into it. On the one hand, it's family, so it's dicey. So I'm trying to be careful in how I answer. On the one hand, it's family. And you know how they say it takes a village? Now, I don't know the unique context of where you're speaking to, but sometimes some of those people have, in some way, shape, or form, contributed to your own development. Sometimes. Sometimes they have not. Sometimes they're just freeloaders. You know, let's be honest. Sometimes they have. And usually in cases where they have, what I would say is apply the same thing as honor your father and your mother. I think it's a practice that I would encourage everyone to imbibe in, that setting something. I think Pastor Dami has talked about this before. Setting something aside to actually give back to those who were part of your growing up. And a lot of times that's family, right? And on a regular basis. That one is generosity. On the other hand, they're the freeloaders. And I think, as I mentioned earlier on, that relationship becomes a dependency, and then when it's taken away, you become the bad person. And the funny thing actually is that it's not their fault that you become the bad person. Their brains are wired to make you the bad person. There's a way dopamine deprivation in the initial onset, because you're the one who has been providing the goodies. All of a sudden, you're the bad person. So I get that. However, I'm going to say this, and I'm saying this from personal experience, something that had happened, something that I had done, trying to quote unquote be generous towards someone and elevate the person, and it didn't exactly turn out well at the end of the day. And in reviewing the relationship, I was asking myself, what are some of the mistakes I may have made? And if I'm being honest with myself, I wasn't as intentional as I should have been. I had provided the person with resources. I had provided the person with a means to upskill. I provided the person with a means to earn. But I wasn't intentional about ensuring that it was, like the person was aligned with that journey. I don't know what you mean, if you get what I mean. A lot of times, and I think it's a very simple question, and I'll take a leaf from what Minister Godwin had asked earlier. Which would you rather as a person? And I can throw it open to the house. Would you rather at the end of every month you call somebody to send you money, or at the end of every month you earn a decent salary? Again, no. Let's not lie. No, there are some people, right? Somewhere, somehow, they would not rather sit down, fold their hands, and let money drop. I would like to believe that they're in the minority. And even those guys, I would like to believe that there are certain things, scenarios that are played out in their lives that made them imbibe that mentality. certain scenarios that happened that made them imbibe that frame of view. And sometimes it's as simple as your politician is doing nothing or the Yahoo boy that is doing nothing and when you see all of those things, the question you're asking is, what can I... I think sometimes also a thing of, what can I do that will make me get to this point? Like, what's the point? Let me just sit down. Like, it's almost like they've disqualified themselves from ever making... And I think, segue, the fact that we don't really have too many examples in society of people who actually went through... Let me not hang it there. Of people who went through paths that are traceable to wealth. The fact that those examples are not so many is a challenge. Because everybody then thinks that the way to get here is cut corners, do this, do that. And that mentality breeds, okay, if I'm not going to do that, let me just sit down and be at the mercy of... Anyway, let me come back. Right? I think if an honest conversation is had with the person, you can find out whether the person is in the bucket of would rather earn or would rather be an entitled person. And if the person would rather be entitled, then that conversation can be had. If the person would rather earn, then a lot of times it needs to be aligned with where the person is today. Because sometimes we tell people, you just came out of school, you don't have anything you're doing yet. Tech bro now, go and learn how to code. But you don't know whether the person is seeing, whether the numbers scatter when, they look at the laptop. Like all this is like... Coding is not that straightforward, though. Let me just but it kind of needs to be aligned with. And the thing with that is that it's very easy. Again, it's very easy to just give the person money. To be intentional about the person's growth takes time. You're likely going to leverage relationships to place the person somewhere. You're likely going to spend time checking on the person, having those conversations. You're likely going to spend some time as well praying to the spiritual words, praying with the person, praying for the person, speaking with the person. It's basically going out in the arena and putting all of that at risk for this person. So again, one of the things I learned was I could have done better. And so in that learning, I'm passing it on to you, right? So that you don't have to go through what I did, because it didn't end on a good note, right? But I could have done better. And just, again, call that, yes, you are being generous at a level, giving the person money. But there are other levels to generosity that can actually lift the person from where the person is to being a sower. There's one more question. I think that'll be the last question. Thank you. Hope I answered your question. Great.
Good morning, Pastor.
Hi, good morning.
Okay, so before fuel increment and all, I usually drive wherever I want to go to. I want to go and buy biscuits, I will drive. I'll drive. But now, if I want to go anywhere, I'll calculate my pocket. So I noticed that when I go out, before I get to the bus stop, Madam, I beg, my son, I want to climb the bridge. I'm not eating since morning. Another bus is following me. By the time I calculate how much I've given people on the road, I think it's better for me.
For one is complete.
It's not better for me to drive. So I'm like, I don't know, because when I see somebody carrying baby, Madam, please give me money. And me, I'm like, 200 now, I cannot even reach this boy to eat. Okay, let me just give him 1,000. Now 1,000, half of my transport is already gone. How long will I keep doing this? And my conscience will be like, see this woman, he's carrying a baby. Are you now wicked? So I was like, let me just say, this is the best time to even ask the question. What can somebody do? Thank you.
You won't like the answer. So I don't know whether you want me to answer it here or we'll see after, but you won't like the answer. My answer to you is my answer to him. Giving the person money is the least you can do. It's a risk. I have to be very clear about that, right? I don't want to downplay what that implies. But again, it's the arena, right? There's no risk, no reward, right? But we give the person 1K today. I bet you next time when you're awake going to work tomorrow, you will find the person there again. I think personally, this is on a very personal note, I think one of the things I've said said past tense, I need to actually reconsider my position. That I may not have a problem with is stomach infrastructure politics. Do you know what stomach infrastructure politics is? Because people are hungry. Some truly, some packagedly. Some by design, some by default. So giving the person 1,000 naira every day you pass by is one way out. And the interesting thing that just crossed my mind actually is that if you make that consistent, it may ease transition to the other levels. So this person knows that on a daily basis or anytime they see you, they see 1K from your hand or gen 2K, they've gone to sites for the day. If after a series of those payments or those givings, right, the conversation is then had that, what do you actually do? How did you get here? Where are you from? Is this where you really want to be? Personally, or maybe it's that I trust in, or I give human beings the benefits of the doubt, or maybe it's naivety or whatever. I know there are some of them that are systemic, they are structures, right? And I'm not going to go into detail. I know some of them is a business. It's actually a business for some of them. Like they have people set up in different places. It's a collection scheme, like POS terminals, right? For some of them, it's actually a structure. But for some of them who are genuinely in need, if those conversations are had, things can change. But again, it takes you doing more on your part. For example, you may need to go out on a Saturday and not on a work day. So rather than having those extra hours chilling in your house, you actually go to engage the person. Because if I say this on a work day, your HR will send you a memo. I won't be there. Or maybe after the office on your way out, you're having those conversations. But the reason why I'm saying you won't like the answer is because it puts more of the responsibility on you. Fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, but that's what it does. Thank you. All right, thank you very much for having me. This has been amazing.